Hello and welcome to TFTon2Wheels. As always, I am your host Mike. On today's episode, we're going to dig into perspective a little bit. So I'm thinking in my head right now of how beautiful this drive is. Coming to you internationally. Well, not internationally, but intra-nationally, I suppose. I am somewhere in Pennsylvania, headed to Boston for BLC 16. Pennsylvania is a very pretty drive, by the way, for those who do not know it. So I haven't done one of these on the freeways yet, or at freeway speed. So if I talk a little slower, it's because I'm paying attention to the road. So one of the first things I talked about in the keynote on empathy, and how to leverage empathy in your classroom, how to be a more empathetic educator, is this kind of first level, as I see it, of, I don't want to say emotional interaction with our kids, but culture building, I suppose, with our students in our rooms. And that's the idea of perspective. So I want to talk a little bit about perspective. Perspective is this idea that we're attempting to see the world through our students' eyes, okay? What's it like to encounter things as a 7th grader or an 8th grader, whatever have you? And one of the most popular ways to gain a perspective on your students is through something like a get-to-know-you activity, personality interest survey. What's your favorite color? Who's your hero? If you could do anything in the world, what would you do? These kinds of questions. All great questions. They all definitely help us draw some conclusions, some parallels, some information about our kids and our classes. But you have to think about what else you can do with these activities, or how can you change the activities, or what you do in your classroom about perspective, so that your students understand perspective as well. So not just you as a teacher gaining perspective, but everyone gaining some perspective. So I want to talk briefly about something Garth and I used to do in our classroom, and then an activity Garth and I believe Travis have used in their classroom. And this all falls at the beginning of the year. If you're at the BLC conference, if you're on Twitter, there's something that started a few years ago, hashtag first 5 days. Garth and I did a presentation, I think 2 years ago, at BLC and around some other places, called the first few weeks. And what we did in the first 5 to 6 weeks of school to build culture and climate, perspective, compassion, and empathy, leadership with our students. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the first activities we would use. And these were the activities that we used to promote the idea of perspective. So the first one we did is first day of school. Students come into class for the first time. I use playing cards. Put one playing card on each desk. Kids got a playing card. You find your playing card. You found your desk. I didn't do alphabetical seating. I didn't have seating charts made up ahead of time. I just left it to random chance. For 2 reasons. One, I hate doing seating charts. It was a waste of time. It was unnecessary paperwork in my life. I never understood assigned seating. I guess until there's a problem. So I didn't want to waste my first day with it. And since I was a middle school teacher, I knew that my students were doing assigned seating in 5 to 6 other classes that day. The last thing a kid wants to do is come to school on the first day. It's boring. Syllabus, seating charts, you know? So I wanted a little variety. Because the quicker you get some buy-in from your kids, especially on the first day, the more they're willing to do for you, the more they're going to create and produce, the better students are going to be. At each desk, once the kids sat down, I passed out a black sheet of paper and a white piece of chalk. So we did a drawing activity the first day. And I used chalk and paper, Garth taught me this, so they can't erase. And that's one of the things you tell them when you introduce this, is that you're not supposed to erase, you just have to keep going. And the premise behind that is that as the activity progresses, if students change their mind, They just have to adapt what they've already done. But they learn that that's okay. So using the data projector, I would blur a vision. I would blur an image. We would use black and white images because they give you good contrast. And we would usually use Civil War scenes just because it's easy to Google search those. So I'd put a blurry image on the board and I'd tell my students to draw what they saw. And you give them a couple minutes to do that. Wait till you start to see that frustration build. Then you make the image a little less blurry and ask them to keep drawing. And you hover around, you ask kids what they're drawing, and you have kids get up and you have them move to other seats, and if they look confused, ask them why, and you know, all those great teachable moments that come out of this activity and kids being confused in your classroom on the first day. But it's important to have them move around and keep drawing. And we never made the image clear until the last day of school. So after they draw it, you know, you go over the drawings, you let the kids with the awesome drawings show them off, things like that. And then you ask one question. And this becomes their homework question. That's right, I gave homework on the first day. It's why did we do this activity? The resources they're supposed to use are their family. They're supposed to go home, sit down, talk to their parents, talk to someone about what this was, why we did it. Usually they go to kids I had the year before, and if they remember, you know, that's a good resource too. But the idea is to draw out the fact that the picture represents our class. It's blurry, it's hazy. We don't know what the goal is yet. We don't know what we're going to do yet. We don't know why we're going to do what we're going to do. And the kids and their different drawings is that perspective of the class and perspective of life. Everyone draws something different. Everyone sees something different. And they're bringing that to this classroom, to this blurry image. They're bringing their own adaptations of how they see things. So day 2 is the discussion of that. You know, what does that mean? How is that going to change? Those questions develop into questions that are a little bit deeper. Like, what does that mean your role as a student should be in here, can be in here, will be in here? And you have those conversations. So it's not just me as a teacher having the students work so that I can gain perspective. It's having the students work so they can gain perspective. I'm an adult, I have a college degree, I have perspective. If any of you have taught for more than, I'd say, 2-3 years of your life, you know that you get the same personalities every year. It's kind of weird. And eventually you match those kids up with those personalities, and just through conversations you're going to learn what that worksheet that the kids spent 40 minutes in your class on the first day, dreading coming back the second day, told you. You know, if you really want to get perspective that way, go down to the lunchroom the first week of school and eat lunch with your kids. Sit at their tables. You know, listen to their conversations. That's a little bit, I think, more authentic way to learn. That's where the kids are really going to tell you what they want you to know and what they want you to hear, because that's how kids work. Give them a little bit of a group sometimes. Find those kids that aren't sitting with anyone at lunch, even better, and find out why, and you know, maybe you can intervene in their lives a little bit sooner. Maybe they'll feel a little bit more connected to you. So perspective is important, and like I said, it's important for you to have as a teacher, but it's really important for your kids to understand what perspective is, because you're going to want them thinking about that. Especially, I mean, maybe it's just because I'm a world history teacher, and in history it's all about perspective. So that's where I see perspective at, and the next step, once you're able to gain that perspective, becomes compassion. And that's what the next video will be about, and we'll talk about. So the second way, the way that Garth did some perspective work after I left the classroom, and we learned this from a teacher in Indiana, in Bloomfield schools when we were there working with them a few years back. If anyone's looking to get me a present, that works. So Garth would do something called a Hadouken, or Hadouken activity with his students. So Hadouken, for those of you in my age range, remember the old Street Fighter video games, and they would make the fireball, And the little character would say Hadouken, and they'd throw the ball of energy out, fireball or whatever, and hit his enemies. So Hadouken is this idea of taking pictures of something that looks realistic but isn't. I'll pop a few images into this video. So you know, you throw your hands at someone, or the Darth Vader choke. It's probably the best one, being that I love Star Wars. Holding someone up in the air. So the person jumps up in the air. Another person poses like they're making them rise up, and then you take a picture and you have this moment that is not real at all. And you have the kids make these, and they see the backdrop of how you can influence perspective and how perspective can change. And actually, the Hadouken's probably really good when you're talking about the internet and using digital resources in your classroom. Because on the first day of school, your kids are faking out the internet. They're creating something that's false, that's invalid. And that's another really good way to get the kids to start to see that perspective really is changing. And it's not a fact. Perspective is not a fact. And they need to take that into account as students.